On September 2nd and 3rd, Russia will be hosting Eastern Economic Forum. Among the main guests, Korea's President Park Geun-hye will be giving keynote speech. And on this occasion, we'll be talking about the forum, the country Russia, and also Korea's Northeastern Asian regional diplomacy, right here in this program, Upfront.
Russia has the world's biggest natural gas reserves, and it is also the second biggest oil supplier. In terms of territory, Russia is the world's largest country and has various kinds of geological structures, which include enormous deposits of natural resources. A lot of neighboring countries have recently sought closer cooperation with Russia. Global position of Russia has been strengthened along with the fluctuating dynamics facing the global society, including the THAAD deployment, South China Sea disputes, and rising competition between the U.S. and China. The second Eastern Economic Forum is scheduled to be held on September 2nd through 3rd in Russia. It is one of the most significant projects promoted by the Russian government and was first established last year to boost the government's new Eastern policy. Russia is going to share the achievement in the development of its Far East during the Eastern Economic Forum. And it is also planning to attract more foreign investment for the Far East development by having series of summit talks with the participating countries. Building a new Silk Road that can deliver gas and oil from Siberia to Russian Far East. And promoting growth of the Far East, which consumes almost 40% of the global energy reserves, along with its energy production bases, have been major goals that Russia has focused on the most. Since the first diplomatic ties, which was established in 1990, Korea and Russia upgraded the bilateral relations into a strategic partnership in 2008 and have broadened the areas of cooperation into various fields, including politics, economy, and security. Russia is one of the countries with the largest share of natural resources, but its manufacturing sector has continued to stagnate, which means it has a high market potential for Korean businesses. Before the bilateral summit, the two countries held the 15th Korea-Russia Economic Science Technology Committee to discuss ways to boost bilateral cooperation on the development of the Russian Far East and the progress made in the bilateral economic cooperation as well. All media outlets in Russia have covered the upcoming summit talks between Seoul and Moscow, which has shown its expectations on the bilateral ties between the two countries. President Park Geun-hye's participation in this year's Eastern Economic Forum was arranged on the invitation of the Russian President Vladimir Putin. And ways to strengthen the bilateral ties and THAAD deployment as one of the countermeasures to deter the North's nuclear activities will be the major issues discussed at the bilateral summit. The world is now paying attention to the second Eastern Economic Forum in Russia. And Upfront discusses the current state of development of Russia's Far East and ways to boost Korea-Russia economic cooperation.
Well, for today's discussion, we have two guests in studio. First, on my left, Professor Ernst Lee, Professor of International Studies of Hanyang University, joining us here, right here. Thank you very much for joining us.
Great pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And Professor Jun-sok, Professor of Economics at the Catholic University of Korea, joining us as well. Thank you very much.
Happy to be here.
Thank you. Well, to talk about the subject that we are discussing today, Eastern Economic Forum, it's not an issue that a lot of us are familiar with. How do you define what this event is all about, the second time?
Yeah, so it started last year, and it's a forum established by President Putin to encourage development of the Eastern European region. Now, the Eastern European region Eastern Russian region.
Right.
And the Professor Lee and I were talking about it just before we came on, and Eastern Russian region is actually the slowest growing region in the Russian area. So they're not only doing badly economically, but they also seem to be losing population. Obviously, people want to go to places that have better growth. So there's a major, President Putin has started a major initiative to try to reinvigorate the economy in that area. And he's doing it, well, the area has 5 large ports, the largest of which is Vladivostok. And there's some natural resources, wood and oil and gas. And based on that, I think he's trying to establish the region as a hub for energy exports and also establish some manufacturing bases so they can manufacture various stuff and use the ports to send it around the world.
Professor Yang, so you're basically saying that this forum itself is a vehicle that Putin created in order to promote economic growth in the far eastern region of Russia.
Exactly.
That's the main idea.
Exactly.
Okay.
So they
very domestically motivated.
Well, not entirely domestically oriented, since it will have to be international trades, and they do need to feed in various inputs from not only Russia but from other countries.
Right. So motivation is domestic. However, the way it will deliver the outcome itself is international for sure. Right. Talking about that point, Professor Lee, I think you mentioned before our program, maybe some people may consider it's time to start investing in Russia. Why would Russia, if that's the case or not, whether it's the case or not, why would other countries be interested in investing in Russia, like countries like Korea, Japan, and China, which are being invited to this forum?
Maybe the first point is that Russia's position in the economic society, actually. Well, Russia has been a very powerful country based on their natural resources, but due to the oversupply, in particular oil, Russian economy is suffering. So there is a proverb saying, a friend in need is a friend in need, indeed, actually. So I think this is time that we can leverage out Russia's position to strengthen tie between Russia and Korea. Not only just the economic tie, but also geopolitical tie. In terms of location of this area, this is has been historically extremely important for Russia, for Russia's expansion to Eastern world, to Korea, to Japan, and to Pacific Ocean. So this carries on geopolitical implication, not only just economic implication, but also geopolitical implication itself.
What I remember, Professor Lee, last time I was in Moscow was about 2-3 years ago, and that was the end period of Russia's boom based upon this oil boom. And now they're saying the country itself is going through downward spiral because there was a bubble. Are we saying that the normalization after the bubble? Do you think that period is still continuing and will continue on for a long time? If that's the case, investors may not be as much interested.
Well, I think Russia has to accept so-called new normal in the economic front. Russia has been focusing on European regions for many, many years. But think about the position of Korea. Korea, according to recent data, we represent 11th largest economy in the world. And behind Korea, there's Japan, which is second largest economy, third largest economy in the world. So from the Russian standpoint, it is time to change their direction to Korea and Japan to facilitate the economic ties that will help to bail out their sluggish economy by utilizing their natural resources, which account for actually about 50% of their government budget and 70% of export. Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about Russian economy later on a little bit more. But Professor Yang, nobody here, probably anywhere around the world, as much is an expert on this forum itself. But if you recall what the forum was all about last time, the first time, and then this time, second time as it's happening, how would you describe the difference between the first round and this time, the second time?
Okay, well, the first time I think it served as an introduction to the region, whether the region will be economically profitable, whether it'll be thought of as a good investment. So even though there were a lot of MOUs signed during 2015 forum, I think most of them were not as concrete as it could have been. Now, according to the Russian side, they're planning to, they think they need about 10.7 trillion rubles to develop the region. And they think that they want to get about 60% of that through foreign investment. And that means they're going to have to really sell the region a lot. And I think they started to do that last forum. I'm not sure if they can manage to turn that completely around and go into concrete initiatives this forum, but they're going to try to do that, switch it into very concrete initiatives so that they can actually get a lot of money flowing in for the manufacturing base, port improvement, and infrastructure investment.
So the efforts continue right here.
Yes.
Okay, in this time, this round. Professor Lee, this time, the second time, Eastern Economic Forum, the main theme is opening up the Russian Far East. The way I see it, it's a little bit puzzling, the wording itself, because at least, I mean, I guess during the time of Soviet Union, Far Eastern region, because of strategic reasons, because Vladivostok was the base for Soviet Far Eastern fleet and so on. Sure, the region must have been closed, but even during that time, they're talking about this like trilateral development cooperation between China, Soviet Union, and Korea, and Japan perhaps, and so on. And now, it's been almost like over a quarter century, 25 years, ever since the Soviet Union collapsed and Russia came into place, and they've been talking about developing all around the region in their country. Why did they choose the word opening up the Russian Far East now?
Well, actually, I think this the time that Russia has decided to re-upgrade the position of Putin government. Well, think about the first time last year when the forum was held in September. In the international society, the position of Russia was not that much influential. And Russia was challenged in many ways. And so when there was
not influential, or maybe in trouble because of Crimea situation,
it's a better
and
word.
the sanctions and so on.
Yeah, it's a better word. And they were in trouble, and they were criticized by many, Western world and many countries. So there was not much the visible track record on achievement from the first forum, as Dr. Yang introduced. It was introductory forum, but now the position of Russia has been changed after many events in the international society. So Russia has become the casting vote in many ways.
That's true, right?
Right.
China, U.S. tensions.
China, U.S. and
right.
Korea, North Korea in many ways. We can elaborate later on. So first of all, the position of Russia has been upgraded and getting more influential in the international front. And then in doing so, Russia can attract more capital. The main purpose of this forum is only one, actually. Okay, maybe increase political influence, but more likely to attract capital to this region, which will help develop and open new era for Putin's regime, actually. Ever since Putin has took his post, the Russian economy has developed dramatically. But now they're facing the second hurdle because of the oil price and many things. To get over this hurdle, and Russia has been changed the direction to Far East, or which 11th largest economy in the world and third largest economy in the world. And if they have very good, favorable relationship, they can target the Pacific Ocean as well.
Right.
Well, if I may also emphasize something else, traditional, as we mentioned before, the Eastern Russian region is the slowest developing region in the Russian area. But because of the Western sanctions, because of the Ukraine and a couple of other incidents, I think they find themselves sort of stuck on the European front. Whereas the Asian countries, well, some of them are taking part in the sanctions, a lot of them are not. So that's an open area there. And also, the Russian economy were very dependent on oil and gas. But because of the low resource prices right now, they're undergoing a lot of economic problems right now. So I think they're realizing that they need to move on to a more manufacturing base. One of the ideas behind the Eastern Russian Development Plan is not only develop the natural resources that they have on the Eastern Russia, but also establish some free economic zones, manufacturing bases around the ports. So I think they're trying to move themselves out of the resources and into a more stable manufacturing economy.
So new focus on manufacturing side. Then Professor Lee, Russia's case, I mean, you know, when Russia has this intention to promote manufacturing as some kind of new frontier in the Far Eastern region, from Korean perspective and Japanese perspective, and even Chinese perspective, would we, as these countries being invited to Russia for this forum, would be interested in investing in Russia for manufacturing basis? To begin with, I would have something in mind such as population, whether Russian people, would they have enough Russian people to be engaged in manufacturing? Are they well trained enough? Do they have enough infrastructure and so on? Would they be such concerns?
Well, I think there's the risk is opportunity for Korea. Well, in a way, and I think you're right, the manufacturing product is very weak in a way, saying that in terms of product quality, in many ways in the terms of production. But the infrastructure is also weak in Russia. So in that regards, I think Korea has a lot of great potential to advance to Russia market. From Russia's standpoint, they have a lot of natural resources, but they have to make an investment to growing region in terms of GDP. Look at the EU GDP, which is 0% level. But look at Korea, still we are enjoying 3% plus minus, and other Malaysia and Indonesia and potentially North Korea. Even this is not the right time to project what potential GDP of North Korea with the opening of this market, but toward more growing potential in this region. So from Russia's standpoint, I think this is a very critical decision and direction change. They make a balance between what they have done so far, focusing on Eastern Europe, in spite of all sanctions, but opening new market in this area.
So whether they're fully ready or not, they just have to do this. It's
well, I think this is right time to partner with and Russia in terms of the infrastructure to help stimulate their economic development plans. So we have to be there in the early stage rather than later, I think.
I see. Okay, at this point, let's take a look at this interview that we have prepared. This is Professor Lee Sang-jun. He's a professor of Russian studies at Kookmin University. He'll give us some idea about overall overview of this economic forum that's taking place this time. So we'll be right back after this short interview.
From program of the first and the second Eastern Economic Forum, you will recognize that Russia, this forum introduced the incentive and institution of their specialized program and, for instance, Vladivostok Freeport development. Korean company in particular interested in the agriculture and the healthcare sector, as well as participation in the development of Vladivostok Freeport. Chinese company, with the help of the Chinese Development Bank, they wanted to develop the infrastructure, logistics, to connecting those three northern east area into Russian past. And the Japanese consistently has shown that it's interested in the electricity grid connection. Unlike last year, this year, President Park Geun-hye and Abe Shinzo Prime Minister and Li Keqiang will participate this conference. So Russian government expects more economic cooperation will be developed in this year. The reason of Russia's interest in the Far East is balanced development domestically, but we did see in larger framework. In early June, President Putin suggested Great Eurasian Union in the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. And right after that, he visited Tashkent, where the SCO summit. This summit accepted India and Pakistan as EU member till 2017. And right after President Putin visited China, it showed that Russia wanted to expand its influence into the Eurasian continent. Peter the Great, the Russian Tsar, created St. Petersburg for the window to Europe. Since then, Russia became the great power in the world. Like that, President Putin wanted to Far East are the base for the Asia-Pacific region. President Putin wanted to revitalize and again became the great power in the world economy, Russia.
Okay, following up with that interview we just watched, Professor Lee, how do we have a good idea about what's happening at this time as Russia is trying all these things through the forum? For instance, investment going in for now, and then based on that, maybe we can project how much growth we can expect and so on. But what's the current landscape?
That's an excellent point. You know, by elaborating the size of the investment they're attracting, maybe we can project size of the potential investment we can do. In the first introductory forum, even though it was introductory that happened last September, Russia had successfully attracted 1.3 trillion ruble, which account for equivalent to 22 trillion Korean won, signing 80 investment contract. So this time they are doubling up. 2.2 trillion ruble, which will be equivalent to 38 trillion Korean won.
Those are very ambitious projections.
Right.
But those are what are supposed to be happening in the future, right?
Right, the second forum, yes, they're targeting.
Semi-committed, the 22 trillion won worth has been, did you say, kind of has been offered or projected and then committed?
That's projected target from this forum. A target.
Okay.
So they are targeting to about 111 projects to be signed versus to last time 80 projects signed. So they are almost doubling up the size of the target investment and the target contract. So I think that we have to take a very serious attention in this area. Yes.
Okay. Professor Yang, at this forum, there will be a series of summits and meetings at the high-level figures, including Park Geun-hye. She will be also, President Park Geun-hye will be also meeting with Putin as well as other world leaders or regional leaders this time. And they'll be also encouraging companies to more actively participate in this regional development and so on. What are you expecting in terms of this meetings taking place sidelines politically and economically?
Okay, well, they obviously want the Korean companies and Korean financial institutions to take a more active part in the investment in Eastern Russia. Now, there are some Korean companies who are doing projects there right now. K-Water, Korean Water Authority, Korean Gas Authority, National Oil Company. They have some projects lined up, but it's not very intensive projects. They're usually cooperative measures to explore some areas and so on. We do have also some manufacturing in the area, but they don't seem to be very extensive. We had a lot of investment into Russia between 2005 and 2010, but they seem to be mostly in the European side, not necessarily in the Asian side. And well, some of the larger companies which are invested in the Asian side seems to be places like Sangyong Motors, and we know that they're not in the best of shape right now. So there's more room for Korea to get in. There's definitely a lot of room for Korea to get in, especially if Russia decides to do a lot of infrastructure projects. A lot of Korean construction companies would love to get their hands on those infrastructure projects. I think, though, the key is money. Russia is doing this forum partially because they do not have enough money to invest in the region by themselves. So they're seeking for a lot of foreign participation, especially in the area of capital. And it's not quite clear whether Korea or the Korean financial sector has enough money, or even if they do, they believe that Russia is a good place to put it in.
These days, however, going beyond railroad ways, aren't they talking about the sea route, which is increasingly opening through the melting of the ice of the Arctic region and so on?
Well, a lot of countries in the region are talking about the transportation network, both over land and the sea. The China has their One Belt, One Road idea. Korea has the Eurasian Initiative, which tries to plug into that. And a part of the East Russia initiative is to use those ports to make the transportation easier.
Right, ports.
So that's definitely part of what they have in mind. But you have to have the infrastructure in place before companies can come in and make it profitable.
Right.
And
Professor Ernst Lee, Professor Yang has mentioned a lot about the challenges facing the plans for manufacturing and so on. Then the question comes to the energy industry. Energy industry is in trouble because of the commodity market in general, worldwide and so on. But do we see Russia trying to kind of blow in a new era of energy or revival for the energy industry, taking this occasion as a new opportunity?
Well, I think Russia and Korea both parties has a mutual interest that can share. First of all, from Russia's standpoint, Russia represents the second largest oil producer. Even though Russia is not a member of OPEC, in terms of production capacity, Saudi Arabia, in general, about 12.8 million barrels per month, and Russia is producing about 9.7, so which
that's a lot.
Put Russia in second position.
Right.
But as you mentioned, a lot of commodity prices are struggling, so Russia is not happy with that. But on the Korea side, we are importing a lot, more than roughly 65% of our crude oil from Middle East.
Right.
And the logistic cost is very, very high.
They may be interested in changing the channel for Russia.
No, not changing. And I think the fundamental or policy direction or policy goal for Korean government is diversification of energy resources.
Right. Diversification.
In terms of diversification, not much thing have done. So in this regard, Russia can be one of the tools for diversification of energy resources that we can get cheaper energy resources from Russia, either it's gas or oil. So these two mutual interests could be met. But I have slightly a complementary interpretation for this forum. Well, the forum wants money, as I said.
Right.
But again, I think Russia would like to try to use it barter trade, give and take, because those countries support more investment, make more investment to Russia. Russia can help this country. Likewise, if South Korea invests $10, well, Russia may have influence equivalent to $10 in terms of the diplomacy, fighting against, North Korea and many things.
So a lot of things on the table that could be given as a give and take.
Right. I think this makes a very good position for Russia to, especially in this very critical juncture. Right?
Professor Yang, switching our focus slightly, the Korea-Russia relations. President Park Geun-hye is participating in this event as one of the main guests, and so. President Putin, I'm sure, has a lot to offer her as at least the protocol and so on. What are we seeing in terms of the impact or value that Korea could find out of this event where President Park Geun-hye is participating as one of the main guests?
Okay, well, Korea is one of the major economies in the region, and I think Korea has, even though it's soured a bit lately, better relationship with Russia than the Japan or China.
Okay.
So Korea, I think Russia partially wants Korea to take a lead on this, so maybe they can get China and Japan to follow. And also, Korea has a lot of expertise in the infrastructure area. So for President Park, whenever she goes on foreign trips like this, she always likes to at least try to negotiate some construction projects for Korean construction companies. So I'm sure that's part of what she has in mind here.
In terms of trade, in terms of general trend or over time trend, what do we see?
Well, it has been dramatically successful ever since Korea has established a diplomatic tie in 1990. The official trade relationship started from 1992. Up to date, last year, the trade volume has been jumped up to more than 130 times.
Okay.
And accounting for almost $26 billion. In annual terms, it accounts for 25% annual growth between Russia and Korea. So in 2014, Russia was Korea's 12th biggest export partner and 11th biggest import partner.
Okay.
And for Russia, Korea was 9th biggest importer. So the economic tie couldn't be better now, but there has been some time gap in between because Korea was very busy in other North Korean issues and many issues. But Russia now, I think, coming back. I think we have to leverage out this very critical juncture to move ahead, I think.
Relating to that point, Professor Yang, we've been hearing a lot of different ideas and initiatives so far. For instance, President Park Geun-hye's Eurasia Initiative, one, and then the internationally shared initiative of Rajin and Hassan project and so on. As a result of this forum, should we be expecting some like a new boost on those initiatives like Eurasian Initiative and the Rajin Hassan project?
Okay, well, the Eurasian Initiative, you not only need the cooperation between Russia and Korea, but you also need the cooperation of a lot of those landlocked countries which were formerly part of the USSR. And I'm not sure if they're going to have time or they've made enough preparations to work out an agreement with all of those countries. So they may agree on something on principle.
It's much more multilateral.
Right.
Okay.
So I don't see anything really concrete happening. They might start dialogues between the countries affected,
Right.
But I'm not sure if they can come up with something concrete this quickly. Now, as far as the Rajin Hassan is concerned, the problem is you have North Korea there, and right now I don't think they're in a lot of mood for talking with South Korea. So
To say the least.
Right. So they again, because there's a North Korean delegation, there might be some working level conversations, not even official ones. There might be some working level informal conversations, but I don't see the project restarting until at least some of the tensions die down.
I see. Any more point to add on those, like a future for the project and initiative?
Well, I think the tension between South Korea and China has been escalated. Nowadays, it's slightly in a general softening mode, but actually, from Korea's standpoint, and to make the balance between China and Korea, we have to use Russia when Russia is in need of capital. By investing capital again, I think we can fully leverage out our political implication and influence to even to China and North Korea.
Talking about North Korea, do you agree with Professor Yang in the sense that North Korea is not a party that we can expect any active participation at this point? Not necessarily out of their North Korea's own intention or lack of it, but over international environment of sanctions and so on.
Well, I fully agree with Dr. Yang because this is not a political event, this is an economic event. But we cannot totally separate between these two, politics and economics, even though we talked about it. The main goal of North Korean delegation, if they may come, will be to reopening of the Rajin, which is North Korean port, and maybe and present some preconditions to open the Rajin harbor, which was stopped by North Korean missile launches. So I think this is a very good platform for North Korea, for us to hear from North Koreans what they talk about, what is their current intention about it.
I see. North Korea's side, actually, for one case is, they, I understand, have offered an idea of setting up a regular ferry service between North Korean port of Wonsan and Vladivostok, for instance. And would you say, because Russia has international responsibility at this time of increasing sanctions on North Korea, Russia is not going to be in a position to be forthcoming, whatever North Korea may want from Russia?
Well, I think as far as something like ferry is concerned, they'll probably allow it. I think you can see what Russia is going to do by looking at what China is going to do. If you look, I think Russia, as well as China, doesn't want the North Korean region to collapse because then they'll have a lot of people, refugees going in, not only to South Korea, but Russia and China as well. And I think they want to avoid that chaos. So as long as it's not something that is politically sensitive, then I think they're going to allow a lot of the North Korean informal trade to take place.
I see. And that's an interesting case. Going back to Professor Lee's earlier point about Russia's unique position these days, maybe for the last year or so, as China-US competition is heating up, Russia fast becoming the casting vote holder or whatever, and as the third party, that's becoming much more important. What do we see in terms of the countries' competition, like China, Japan, Korea, competing against one another, to get more with Russia going? What do you see ahead?
Okay, well, Russia doesn't seem to be too much interested in this project. I don't see a lot of active Chinese participation. I think Koreans are more excited about this than the Chinese, or at least that's from the material that I've seen lately. But I think also that China, because of the situation between U.S. versus China, I think, and also because of the North Korean situation, China will have to take account of what Russia wants to do, because China and Russia, at least in terms of politics, do seem to be a bit more natural allies. So there's that point. Some of the initiatives, I think, can be tied together. The One Belt, One Road, this policy, and the Russians' New Silk Road policy, Korea's Eurasian initiative. There's slight differences in the region. There's slight differences in the region, but overall they can be linked.
Rather than competition, maybe we should come up with better ideas of merging different projects.
So the Eurasian initiative has a bit more emphasis on those landlocked countries that used to be part of the USSR. The Russian initiative that we're talking about obviously has more to do with the Russian inland, within the border type of infrastructure. China wants to start from Peking and go to Beijing and go to Europe. So if you can just link that somehow, then the whole project can be subsumed into one huge project. But then there's problem of who's going to take lead, who's going to provide financial resources, who's going to provide labor, and so on. So that's going to have to be worked out. And I think Korea, to its credit, is trying to work that out more than China or Russia.
Well, if I may, well, I think this is an excellent point. I look at this forum as an excellent occasion that Korea can take initiative between China and other countries, because Korea has a very good relationship with China, but the relationship is always not good and bad. It's sometimes good and sometimes bad. But we need an alternative, reliable relationship that we can make a balance between this China relationship. So looking at the members participating in this forum, I don't see many visible countries that can make an investment into this region except Korea. Because as I mentioned, Japan, they are lack of electricity, but to have supply of electricity from Russia, Japan needs to revise the laws, which will take a long time. The immediate effect can be done by South Korea. So South Korea alone can take an initiative card to lead this forum. And if we do that, I think from economic relationship, we can escalate to more geopolitical influence to North Korea and other countries. So I think this is a very good platform, I think.
Wonderful point right there. And at this juncture, we'd like to connect with an expert in Russia, and we'll ask him some interesting questions right here. We have two guests lined up, and this is the first one. We are connecting directly here. This is Professor Toloraya. He is a director of Asian Strategy Center at Russian Academy of Science. Professor Toloraya, are you there? Okay. We'll start with the first question. We'd like to ask you a question that could be a little bit sensitive, but because we didn't have a chance to talk about it in this studio, we'd like to ask you that question. That is THAAD, Terminal High Altitude Area Defense question, that has been kind of thorny between Beijing and Seoul for quite some time so far. And since we have you as a Russian expert here, we'd like to ask you a question. We do know Russia has been against the idea of installing THAAD, the anti-missile defense system here in Korea. Could you explain Russia's position in terms of opposing the idea of installing THAAD here in Korea?
Russia is concerned that this would call the arms race, because in response to THAAD development, deployment, China will have to react, will have to increase its missile and military potential in Northeast, maybe make some redeployment of troops. And this in turn may cause Japan to militarize, since the Prime Minister Abe is strongly for the change of constitution. And this in turn will make Russia react. We will have to deploy a new missile system probably in Far East, and it's true that some of them would be aimed at the THAAD bases in Seoul, in South Korea, because this is a normal thing that the military people should do when they see the danger. And also we will probably have to maybe make new military installations, including these in Kuril Islands and other places. So this is a start of a whole region-wide arms race.
Director Toleraev, the second question here is, based on the understanding that this economic development and the regional development issue, together with some of the important strategic issues such as THAAD, will become the main focus of discussion at this event. We want to ask you this question about President Park Geun-hye's keynote speech. There she'll be addressing, of course, all these issues all together. And what are you expecting in terms of her efforts in this particular speech to find new pathway, positive pathway, towards stronger relations between Korea and Russia?
Well, I think that participation of the Park Geun-hye, President Park Geun-hye, along with Premier Abe in the Eastern Economic Forum. By the way, I'm also going there. It's a very great opportunity to improve our relations. Also, we welcome the Korean approach to the joining efforts in Eurasian Initiative and Eurasian Economic Union joint cooperation. Maybe the free trade agreement will be started to discuss. Now there are research and being on the modalities of the future free trade area, and I think it's very significant. And also, we can discuss some project in concrete economic areas.
Thank you very much, Director Toleraev, for your wonderful insights and words. Thank you very much. Okay, now moving on with our discussion in studio here. Professor Yang, the summit between Korea and Russia, President Park Geun-hye and President Putin, overall, they will be for sure talking about all these economic issues that we've been talking about all along in this program today. But North Korea, nuclear issues will be also added on top of it. What else do you see, or on the nuclear issue as well, what are some of the important challenging points you see ahead for the summit?
Okay, well, I think for President Park, the biggest emphasis is going to be on the North Korean issue. But problem is, I don't think President Putin is going to share that. I think President Putin is much more interested in economic development of the region. So there's going to have to be some give and take here. Problem is, what is President Park going to bring to the table? And I'm not quite sure whether and how much she can bring to the table at this point. Even though we're talking about the economic relationship here, one thing that always caught me a bit curious is that the Korea has never really thought about starting an FTA with Russia.
Okay.
I'm not quite sure whether this is because of the Russian preference or the Korean preference, but there might be a topic of conversation during the meeting. We also need to note that Russia is not participating in RCEP or TPP.
Right,
so if we can get a FTA with Russia, then that'll be, I think, something that's unique. But still, we need to know exactly what the both sides' opinions are going to be on that. And also, if Korea is going to invest in Russia, then problem is whether, Russia has never been a country which is known for a very strict rule of law and investor protection.
Still, they have a long way, some ways to go.
Some ways to go, and one of the ideas behind this particular initiative, the Eastern Russian Initiative, is they passed a lot of laws strengthening investor protection and freeing up a lot of regulations so that they can make the free trade zone. And there's going to be questions on whether this is on paper only or whether they'll actually be able to free things up on the ground. So those are the things that I think they could talk about during the summit meeting.
Good overview of this summit meeting. And we'd like to bring in our second Russian expert being connected, directly from this studio to where he is in Russia. He is Professor Artem Lukin. Professor Lukin is a professor of international studies at Far Eastern Federal University. Professor Lukin, welcome to the program. Thank you very much for joining us. And I'd like to ask you, first of all, the first question. So you have mentioned that Russia could actually play an important role in terms of kind of making North Korea more, I don't know, coming back to the table of discussions and becoming more cooperative, giving up their confrontational strategy here. What do you mean? We'd like to have more explanation about this particular leverage that you're seeing in terms of Russia can play with regard to North Korea and their nuclear issues here.
As you know, Russia, as a permanent member of the UN Security Council, supported and joined the UNSC Resolution 2070, adopted last March, and Russia is faithfully implementing this resolution. So this is Russia's contribution to this matter. But apart from Russia's participation in the sanctions regime against North Korea, I think Russia's most important contribution to resolving the North Korean conundrum could be on the diplomatic side. So Russia is probably the only significant player which still maintains kind of normal and maybe even friendly communication lines with North Korea. And those lines of diplomatic communication can be used to engage the North Korean government in some kind of dialogue, whether behind closed doors or in some kind of official negotiations. So, in short, Russia could act as a major middleman, as a major mediator in resolving this problem. Thank you.
Okay, next question is the Rajin Hassan project that it had generated a lot of excitement at the beginning, but kind of has stalled as a result of North Korean situation, North Korean nuclear issues and the following international sanctions and so on. With regard to that point, what do you see at this particular occasion of the forum, whether North Korea could be kind of like brought back to the overall peace process in which they'll have to give in and give up some of their initiatives of nuclear issues here and brought back to the circle of cooperation for the region? What do you see in terms of bringing change for North Korea at this particular occasion?
After the North Korean nuclear test in January and the ballistic missile launch in February, after the UN sanctions were slapped on North Korea, the Hassan Rajin project is now has now been frozen. So realistically speaking, I think it can be resumed only after the current crisis is overcome and the sanctions are lifted on North Korea, because the sanctions are so tight, so tough now that it's kind of impossible to continue with the Hassan Rajin project at the time.
Okay, Professor Lukin, thank you very much for your interesting words and perspective. Thank you so much. Goodbye. Okay, coming back to our studio here, Professor Lee, Ernst Lee, about Russia and North Korea here. A lot of people would actually agree about North Korean nuclear issues, particularly the THAAD. I'm talking about the THAAD here, which is a North Korean nuclear related issue here. About THAAD, Russia has been less forthcoming in terms of its criticism against the idea, relatively speaking, in relation to in comparison with Beijing, for instance. And overall, North Korean nuclear initiative or nuclear issues, Russia has been increasingly more, relatively speaking, more critical about North Korea these days. Do you agree with that observation, meaning implying that Russia is a country that we have to pay more attention to get greater support against North Korea. Do you agree with the perception of Russia as a emerging new position, as a closer?
Well, I think looking back, the relationship between Russia and the United States under nuclear non-proliferation treaty. So the reason why China is very angry about that is potential impact the U.S. air base while looking over China.
Right.
But in terms of Russia side, that's slightly less relevant to that. But fundamentally, I think in the region, nobody, including China or Russia, want anyone, including meaning that North Korea or nuclear weapons, nuclear missiles. So they're strongly against it. But in terms of Saudi influence, I think there's nature for Russia to less critic about the deployment of Saudi in South Korea. Rather, there are economic issues are more upfront than this political or military issues, I think. So they are paying more attention. I think we have to, again, make the best use of this Russia's position nowadays.
I think that makes a lot of sense, because a lot of people have been wondering about the difference between Beijing and Moscow regarding THAAD and North Korean nuclear issues here. Professor Yang, as an observer of international affairs, what would you say about this question? That is, President Park Geun-hye will be very busy starting off with this event that we've been talking about, the Eastern Economic Forum taking place in Vladivostok, September 2nd and 3rd. But following that, she also will have to fly to China, Hangzhou, the city of Hangzhou for G20 meeting. And then after that, she'll also have to fly to Southeast Asia for the ASEAN-related summits and so on. Her long, extended, continuous trip here, well, what do you see in terms of the outcome, intentions and outcomes, and then the impact?
Okay, at least for Korea, I think political issues outweigh the economic issues right now.
Okay.
So that's going to be foremost in President Park's mind.
You're talking about North Korea?
North Korea.
Okay.
And I think G20 is going to share that feeling somewhat. I mean, G20 has a lot of, Europe has a lot of problems. China is facing a slowdown, but I don't see anything that's really unifying the G20 right now, except perhaps, possibly, the North Korean nuclear proliferation issue. I think, at least for this time around, I think talk is going to be more on politics rather than economics, which has been unusual for G20 meetings in the last few years.
I see. Professor Lee, any final words on your observation on this shuttle diplomacy that Professor Yang has just
Well, I think, starting from Russia, I think this is a very important starting point. Once we have a very successful record from out of this forum, I think they can influence her President Park Geun-hye's China meeting in Hangzhou at the G20 and other Asian countries. So I think this is very good starting point. I think we have to fully leverage out the Russia's position again, because this is a Russia-led forum. We'll have more time. President Park Geun-hye will have more time to discuss about Russia-led issues that we can compromise and we can choose. But in the G20, we'll have more diversified 20 summits.
Right.
So they will have limited time to talk about our own interest.
Thank you very much. Professors Ernst Lee and Professor Yang Jun-sok, thank you very much for sharing your wonderful insights today. I certainly have learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And
I enjoyed it.
Yes, and as I've learned a lot from this wonderful guest today, I'm sure our viewers who have joined from all around the world must have learned a lot as well. So next time when we talk about these important issues that matters for Korea as well as the world, we want to ask you to join us once again. Until then, this has been Kim Byung-ju. Goodbye.